So we're standing by the Angel at Southview Cemetery. The Angel was dedicated our 75th anniversary in 1961. On the bottom, it lists the 6 men who were listed on the charter for Southview. We were started in 1886 by these 6 men. They wanted a more dignified burial place for their loved ones in Atlanta. And so my great-grandfather is the 3rd one down, Albert Watts. And he came out to this area of Atlanta, which was farmland at that time, and purchased 25 acres of farmland to start the cemetery. They got the cemetery chartered in 1886, and we began burying at the cemetery after that. And we've been here for almost 140 years. We'll be 140 years on April 21st, 2026.
You said great-grandfather?
My great-grandfather. He was born enslaved in Athens, Georgia. So walk this way and give you the grand tour.
Okay.
We started out 25 acres and we've now grown to over 100 acres. And there are over 80,000 people buried here at Southview. This area of the cemetery was purchased primarily by African-American morticians. So you'll see some morticians' names that you may know from Atlanta: Gooseby, Thornhill, Dawson, some of the historic ones as well. Stocks, Sherwood, Chenault. And we'll keep walking.
Okay.
This is Mrs. Hoggerbrooks. She was one of the first African-American female morticians here above ground. Her nephew ran her mortuary till just a few years ago, and they now use her mortuary as a place to show pictures and a community gathering spot. But she was a member of Big Bethel Church and a big member of the community. Next, we're going to stop at the location on the right for the McClendons. Dr. McClendon was a physician in Atlanta. He graduated from Meharry Medical School and came to Atlanta to practice. He opened a hospital that was for a long time on Martin Luther King, and they delivered a lot of babies, but they had a first-class hospital in Atlanta for African Americans. The hospital lasted until the 80s, and a lot of people you may know were born there. So Benny Bell McClendon was his wife, and she was credited with being the brains of the operation. Dr. McClendon was listed in Ebony magazine as being a medic with a purpose. So he was president of the Atlanta Medical Association. The Atlanta Medical Association met in a hotel here and went to eat at their bar, their cafeteria bar, and they were arrested. And so he was a militant medic, is what they were known as. But Benny Bell McClendon was from Nashville. They met and married and moved here and had a big impact on the Atlanta community with their hospital and also with the development of a housing area. One of the first black subdivisions in Atlanta was had some of their property, and that's where they lived, and they contributed to it. Benny Bell McClendon bought tickets to the opera in 1960. They came to the Fox, the Metropolitan Opera came to the Fox Museum, the Fox Theater, and she bought tickets with her girlfriend, and they got dressed up and got a car and went to the Fox, and they were not allowed to be seated because they had bought their tickets in a white section and they were African American. So she started a petition and she campaigned to have the Fox be integrated at the Metropolitan Opera performances. And so she wrote letters and they picketed, and she got Martin Luther King to sign one of the letters to the Met. And the next year, the Fox Theater was integrated just for the Metropolitan Opera performance. So it's these little indignities that occurred all the time that many people had a hand in getting rid of. So we're going to go over here to see the Dobbs family now. The gravesite for John Wesley Dobbs and for his wife, Irene Thompson Dobbs. John Wesley Dobbs was the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons, and when he passed, he was still the Grand Master, and so this statue is to honor the Grand Masters. We have two here at Southview, and I believe there are 7 across the world. But it has the Prince Hall Mason symbol on it. He was credited with registering to vote over 10,000 African Americans in Georgia, and he's the grandfather of Maynard Jackson, who was Atlanta's first black mayor. So he was an orator. He was also a Pullman porter early in his life, but then he would travel around and give speeches and register African Americans to vote. He had 6 daughters. He and his wife had 6 daughters. They all graduated from Spelman College with honors. 2 of them were the valedictorian of their classes. Wilda Dobbs is his second to the youngest, but she was a cultura soprano. She performed in operas all across the world, and they traveled widely because they went to see her perform. Their oldest daughter was Irene Carolyn Dobbs Jackson, and she was bilingual, and she was Maynard Jackson's mother. But she was head of Spelman's Department of Foreign Languages, as well as the head of the Department of Foreign Languages at NCCU, North Carolina Central University. But all of his daughters went to different cities and made a big impact wherever. Herman Jerome Russell Sr. He was an entrepreneur and has a construction company still named for him that his family still runs. But he graduated he was from Atlanta, and he built houses in the Summerhill area. He saved money from selling candy to build his first rental house, and his rental property helped pay for his Tuskegee tuition when he went to Tuskegee. At Tuskegee, he developed a group of friends, and they would go around and undercut the contractors in Tuskegee so that they would do the drywall work for them. And that also helped him pay his tuition there. And he came back to Atlanta, and he was significant in the civil rights movement. He bankrolled a lot of the people who went to prison or went to jail or were picked up so that they could get out of jail. He was kind of behind the scenes during the civil rights movement, but definitely someone that should be remembered. He helped build the Georgia Dome and many of the buildings in Atlanta. Dr. and Mrs. Brazelford Brazil. He was a dean of students at Morehouse College. He used to have Sunday dinner at his house that his wife would cook, and MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of their frequent guests. There's a building at Morehouse named for the Brazils. I've learned a lot of history. I've been here at the cemetery for about 20 years, and I love history. So this was one of the reasons that it keeps me going here. It's hard to help families that have had a loss, and so you really feel for them at their time of loss. But the history is something that you can think about and be proud of and remember. So this is Billy and John Hardin. They had the first African American owned gas station in Atlanta. They also owned the Black Crackers. You may have heard of them or not, but they would have their games at Ponce de Leon Park when the White Crackers were not performing there or didn't have games there. And even when the Black Crackers were there, their patrons couldn't use the locker rooms that the White Crackers used, and they couldn't use the bathrooms. So they petitioned the state and sued the state, or sued Ponce de Leon Park, to make the Black patrons able to use the bathrooms on the first floor, and for the team to be able to use the locker rooms. So this is the original 25 acres that were purchased back in 1886. And this was a dairy farm. We're going to walk up here to the sign that talks about our history. So this is our original 25 acres. And we have a sign here that talks about the history of the cemetery of their own. The oral history is that 9 men got together in the basement of Friendship Baptist Church to discuss the problem of having to bury their loved ones in Atlanta. They went to several cemeteries and asked could they go in through the front gate, could they not be buried in the swamps, and they were told no, they weren't going to change their policies. So they decided to come out to Jonesboro Road and have a cemetery of their own. And these are some of the notables who are buried here at Southview. And there are people from all walks of life buried at Southview. These are people whose names are known, but most of the 80,000 people here are names that nobody knows but their family and their friends. And they are just as important as all of those whose names that we may know. My family lot is down here in this area. My great-grandfather bought 16 burial spaces back in 1900. This part of the cemetery is non-perpetual care, meaning that at that time they didn't take any money and put it aside to maintain the grounds. We keep them mowed and weed-eated, but to restore some of the older walls or raise some of the monuments that may have fallen, we have a 501c3 that we accept donations for to preserve and record and restore the historic part of the cemetery. I'm going to walk on back down this way. We try to raise the names of and the history of people who are here that their history's been forgotten or that it needs to be more widely remembered. In this area, we have the first black registered nurse. We have the first black person to own an AM station, an AM radio station. So a lot of firsts in here. We have lots of ministers as well buried in this area. This area of the cemetery was opened up in the 1960s. And there are many people in this area who are noteworthy or have names that you might recognize. Reverend Borders is buried over here. He was at Wheat Street Baptist Church. McFeeters is here. There's a branch of the public library that's named for Annie McFeeters, and she rests here. Owen Funderburg was credited with saving Citizens Trust Bank several times. He was the president of Citizens Trust Bank here in Atlanta. The Guest lot, they are cousins of Gladys Knight, and there are two. William Guest is buried right there, and he was one of the Pips. And one of the female Pips, Eleanor Guest, is also buried on that lot.
The oldest grave in here, when were they buried?
In the 1880s. There was, the oral history tells us that there was a black infant that was buried in 1885 before the cemetery was chartered. And during the chartering process, the state of Georgia sent investigators around to the neighboring farms and asked them, was it okay that this become an African American cemetery? And their response was, oh, they've already buried that black baby over there, so the land is tainted. And so it worked in our favor that we were able to get chartered. But this is where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was buried originally, in this exact crypt. He was buried on the side where his mother is now. He was moved to the King Center about a year and a half later. When he was here, there was a 24-hour guard on his gravesite. But even so, someone came down Jonesboro Road and shot into the back of it and shattered the back panel. His body wasn't harmed, but after that he was moved to the reflecting pond at the King Center.
How long was his body here?
For about a year and a half. He was moved in 1970.
So you had to have a guard here.
There was a 24-hour guard over his resting place. You know, we think of him now as someone who's revered by everyone, but at that time he was a polarizing figure. As many people loved him as hated him. So.
Is that still shattered, or did they replace it on the back?
It was replaced, but there is a place where you can see. So one of the bullets went in right here. The other shattered this panel. Of course, that's been replaced. But his sister actually told me this story, Christine Ferris King Ferris, sorry.
Show me that one more time.
This is the place where one of the bullets landed. And at that time, this fence was not in front of the cemetery either.
So at the time, his mom, she wasn't dead at the time?
No, his parents, he predeceased his parents.
That's right.
Yeah. His mother was murdered in church. She was playing the Lord's Prayer at the organ, and someone came in and they were trying to shoot Daddy King, but they could only reach her. And they shot and killed her. I believe that was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they killed more than just her in the church. I think there were 2 other people who passed that day. Yeah. So his mom was killed June 30th, 1974. And her epitaph says, "Her life shall be filled with music." And the dad died of natural causes in 1984. And his epitaph is, "I love everyone, still in business, just moved upstairs." Dr. King was probably our most well-known person buried here until 2021.
Was he above? Are these above ground?
Yes, they're above ground. This is Georgia marble.
What's the story behind Georgia marble?
Comes from Elberton, Georgia, for the most part, but it's a beautiful marble. It's very porous, so it does take in the dirt from the air. But this is probably a very precious piece right now. Much more expensive than it was when it was first purchased. Georgia marble is really a precious stone. Mm-hmm. And so this is where Hank Aaron is laid to rest. He gets a lot of visitors. Of course, I had a group of middle schoolers not too long ago, and I said, "Well, this is where Hank Aaron is." And they were like, "Who's Hank Aaron?" So we forget, but we told them he was the home run king. He was one of the first African American baseball players that also moved into the front office at the Braves. But he's best known as being the home run king, one of Major League's greatest baseball players.
It might be a crazy question, but when they get ready to bury, like, his wife, how did that come open? How did that work?
This front door on this one opens. Yeah, on the king crypt, it's in the back. But on this crypt, it's these front doors.
Where does it open? Just right there?
Yeah. It slides up and comes back out. And then there's an inner shutter in there too that protects him.
And like these that are around them, are they notable or?
I don't know. I don't know anything specific about many of them. There's one down at the end who's an architect who designed most of the buildings at Morehouse.
Okay.
But yeah, everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the Alexander lot, and I love this pink stone here. But T.M. Alexander was an insurance guy. And when the boycott in Montgomery was going on, the people who drove cars, instead of having the patrons get on the buses anymore, needed to be insured. So the insurance people in Montgomery thought, oh, we'll stop this, we'll just stop insuring their cars. So Martin Luther King called TM, Theodore Alexander Sr., and said, can you help us with these insurance? So he called Lloyd's of London and got all of those cars insured. So there are all these foot soldiers around. You know, our children learn the names of Martin Luther King and some that definitely should be remembered, but there were lots of small indignities and little foot soldiers and people who helped to make the civil rights movement the movement that it was. His wife, Dorothy Hudson, was a fashion designer, and she happened to be the friend of Benny Bell McClendon that went to the opera with her at the Metropolitan Opera at the Fox Theater.
How common are the above ground like this? Was that a thing that was real common at one time, or do things go in fads, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think it was really common at one time. Okay. The Kings are buried above ground at the King Center as well. So I think it was something that was kind of a sign of elegance. We have above ground mausoleums here now, and there's some that have been purchased here recently as well, but we have a full garden mausoleum, so it's not just individual for your family, but we have those available as well.
Is it more expensive to do that?
Yes, okay. It's more expensive. Mm-hmm. We can walk down here and
okay.
see where Dr. King's sister
okay.
rests. And his brother is actually right across from her.
How much room do you have left here?
Of the 100 acres, we still have several acres left that have not been developed.
Okay.
We have enough to take us into, I would say, at least 20, 30 more years.
Oh.
And we also own property across the street. So this is where Christine King Ferris and her husband, Isaac Newton, are buried. She was the longest serving professor at Spelman. She's a Spelman graduate and an AKA. And she was a person instrumental, along with Coretta Scott King, in keeping the name of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement history alive. She was a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and she was sitting with her mom that day on the organ when her mom was killed. Mm-hmm. And across this way is where her brother rests. He's in ground, but that's the King monument that's above.
Which one?
The very white one.
Oh.
It says King on it. And he died he was drowned or died in a drowning accident in a swimming pool.
How long ago was that?
I think it was just a couple of years after Dr. King passed. 52 to, let's say 66. Let's see. That's the third. 69. So Reverend A.D. King, he died in 1969. And this here, Jackson, Graham Jackson, was one of the favorite musicians of FDR. He got his picture on, well, he performed down at the Little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. He was also a World War II veteran. But he performed at FDR's funeral, and there was a picture of him on the front of Life magazine with a tear coming down his face when he was playing a hand organ. Dr. and Mrs. Asa Yancey are buried here, and their daughter Karen. Dr. Yancey was credited with being the first African-American doctor that was the head of physicians at Grady Hospital. And he helped to make Grady a hospital that was acceptable, that would accept many patrons. And Mrs. Yancey was on the Board of Regents for the state of Georgia, so she helped